10 things leftists don't understand about right-wing voters. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and although I still think of myself as left-wing technically, over the past year or so, I have made a very deliberate effort to get to know several people one would place on the political right. Unfortunately, because I live in an ultra left-leaning area and have almost zero chance of ever coming into contact with these people in real life, I had to do this by way of the internet. But I have gotten to know several right-wing people, mostly by way of chatting with them on YouTube live streams. Prior to this election, there was a lot of leftist propaganda that started off about the same as what I'm saying in this video, claiming that such and such a person got to know Trump supporters and, surprise, surprise, they're all just a bunch of racist Islamophobes. And that is obviously their entire reason for voting for Trump, mixed in with some casual misogyny against Hillary Clinton. Of course, there's no way that leftist media sources might ever admit that these voters are adults with at all mature minds who aren't just doing whatever their yokel-ass family tells them to. No, they have to just be evil, lunatic, flaming bigots to ever question Hillary Clinton. Or they had to be. But she lost. Obviously, I think it's a lot more complicated than people just being racist Islamophobes. And if you are open to my perspective, you can actually go through my past live streams if you want to witness me having these types of conversations with people who are either full-blown Trump supporters, conservatives, libertarians, or just people who live in Trump country. Many of these people voted for Obama twice. And Trump is almost in office, so I personally think that people on the left cannot afford to ignore how these people think any longer. Let's begin. First off, most of these people really don't care what you think of them a whole bunch, because they have guns anyway. I'm being serious when I say this. Basically, every right-leaning person I ever talk to can tell me about their guns if I'm interested. Which is unfamiliar to me because I did not grow up around guns at all. And I think most people in big urban centers have similar backgrounds to myself. That said, I think a lot of left-leaning people think that they can just gang up on people endlessly, especially on the internet, and then publish their home addresses and send threats, etc., if, say, these people are opposed to Black Lives Matter. And maybe that would work if these people didn't own guns. However, most of the people I talk to say that as long as social justice warriors aren't getting them fired from their jobs, they basically are more than welcome to send people over to their houses to harass them. They'll just pull a gun on them and say, "Get off my property or I'll shoot." It's not a huge concern to them. This type of intimidation just doesn't work on gun owners. Secondly, most right-leaning people I've talked to aren't in massive student loan debt. This is important because it gives them little incentive to support candidates like Bernie Sanders, who talk about free college, or Jill Stein, who spoke about debt relief for college loans. Most of these people went to trade school or they work in a field that doesn't require much education, and often they aren't in the red at all. So when they hear a bunch of people who grew up probably a lot more wealthy than they are and live in much more expensive areas who are whining about being in $100,000 worth of debt to get a sociology degree, well, they have no sympathy. Likely, they just fucking hate you, because they feel like they will potentially be paying taxes to bail your ass out. The third thing I've learned about right-wing voters is that they are better at using the internet than you think. They're probably better at it than you are. Bullshit, you say immediately, and you want to turn off this video. Most leftists think that because they've been using the internet for well over a decade and maybe even work directly with computers, that you must know everything about the internet. If that's you, congrats. Pat yourself on the back. That doesn't mean that you have bothered to look outside of the massive and overwhelmingly biased funnel of leftist social media and the leftist blog sphere, which composes basically everything you ever see on Facebook, and also Twitter to a certain but slightly lesser degree. Because of the fact that conservatives and libertarians have been the severe underdog culturally for so long, they have been forced to work a lot harder to find news and stories about the things they are interested in, mostly finding their news from YouTube, and no, that includes a lot more than InfoWars, so don't get any stupid ideas, that's not all they're looking at. These right-wing internet experts also use Twitter to network with their peers and share videos, as well as some closed and private groups on Facebook that they kick leftists out of. You see, living in a world completely inundated with leftist media has become so easy if you want to agree with leftist politics that it's actually hard to break out of that veritable matrix of the quote-unquote progressive narrative. In order to break out, you basically have to relearn how to use the internet and actually search for stuff. And right-wing people have been forced to do just that over the past few years. The fourth thing I've learned from talking to right-leaning people is that a lot of them have families, and they are proud to have families. I think people from the left just have this idea that everybody in the right is a bunch of hillbillies that had their first abortion at age 13, but then eventually had 3 kids they didn't even want when they couldn't pay for their abortions, or because some Bible thumpers shut the clinic down, or some shit. This hasn't been my experience from talking to these people. A number of these people have said that they have kids because they always wanted kids, and they very carefully plan their families and are proud to be parents, as well as are excited about parenting and talk about their children. They have conversations with each other, with parenting advice and everything. The fifth thing I've noticed is that not all right-wing voters are Christian by a long shot, and while many might be Christian, it doesn't control every aspect of their lives. This was way different in past decades when the religious right was strong. For example, I remember when I was a kid in the 90s and I met some people from a small town at a ski lodge I stayed at one weekend. I made friends with one of the kids for whatever reason, but their parents were full-blown religious wackos, and the kids were only allowed to listen to a few music artists and would get into trouble for saying minor swear words like hell and damn. I know that these people probably still do exist, but I have yet to come across them on any live streams. I've met some Christians, but they are all pretty nice and never really bring their religion up. I think, truthfully, at this point, it's mostly just people who want a moral compass and maybe a bit of community that the church provides, and I don't really see any problem with that. They're usually nicer people than intersectional feminists, that's for sure. Number 6 of the things I've noticed about people on the right is that, as of now, they are mostly pretty gay-friendly, just so long as the gay guys aren't asshole SJWs. Just last decade, I remember communicating with people who were right-leaning online, and it seemed like they were willing to be friends with gay guys, just so long as the gay guy basically never talked about being gay. Now it seems a bit different, and people are a lot more used to the idea that certain gay guys are actually totally funny and cool. Say what you want about Milo Yiannopoulos, but I imagine he helped a lot with that. And let's face it, right-wing people have never had a huge problem with lesbians as long as they don't have bad attitudes. The 7th thing I have learned about right-leaning people that I wasn't sure I'd find is that there's all sorts of strong women in conservative culture. They just do different types of things than left-leaning women do. They don't necessarily organize political protests to save Planned Parenthood in their neighborhoods, but they might just organize protests to save old growth forests in their state, and nobody ever necessarily gives them any credit because it is usually left-leaning people who are environmental activists. Some of these women own small businesses and work quite hard, making not a whole lot of money, and nobody ever talks about that because they aren't Fortune 500 CEOs. Others might technically be homemakers, but are extremely involved in the lives of their families and do things like make their daughters' prom dresses for them, and are surprisingly talented at doing that. The 8th thing I learned that really surprised me, which is something I think is related to the internet, is that right-leaning people often seem to know the left better than the left does. When right-leaning people are opposed to feminism, for example, feminists basically always just assume it's because they don't know that feminism just means equality, which is a ridiculously arrogant and just downright incorrect thing to assume. In reality, a lot of right-wing people started studying feminism online a few years ago and saw fourth-wave feminism for the bullshit that it is. Trigger warnings made their way as jokes onto Fox News, and various scandals regarding social justice and feminism came to light by way of conservative news sources like Breitbart and YouTube channels. Many of these stories were things that left-leaning people would have been interested in, but right-wing people seemed to be the only people talking about them, such as the case of Stephanie Guthrie versus Gregory Allen Elliott in Toronto, where a feminist got a man arrested and put on trial for 3 years because they got in a Twitter argument. He was found innocent because he didn't say anything remotely threatening to Guthrie, and yet still, leftist media has only reported on it in terms of the feminist angle from what I've seen. This is fucking pathetic. If you are on the left and you didn't hear about this, I think you should be ashamed of yourself, and especially at least ashamed of leftist journalists. The ninth thing I learned about the right is probably mostly covered by now, but I want to make it abundantly clear that the right wing follows current events in general global politics seemingly a lot better than the left does, at least at the moment. They are a lot more concerned with global politics, in many cases likely because they have relatives in the military or are in the military themselves. And they see how bad things are getting in Syria and in relation to Clinton and Obama basically trying to start a conflict with Russia. The 10th myth that I would like to dispel about the political right in America is that many of them know damned well that they are poor. And they care about other poor people, but they simply want people to work for what they've got. They want them to have agency. You see, there's a common misconception floating around leftist culture that right-wing people are just a bunch of hillbilly yokels that are stupid enough to believe that they'll strike oil in their backyards on accident or win the lottery or something. And they just ain't wanna be paying no taxes to the liberal government when they strike it rich. Something, I don't know. It's really fucking stupid, actually. Shut the fuck up with that bullshit. That's not what's going on. These are mostly people who have been forced to work very hard their entire lives and come from families who had to work hard. They don't want to avoid paying taxes on the off chance that they might become rich. They want to pay less taxes to put food on the fucking table for their family. And put somebody in office that at least admits that they have been losing jobs in their region instead of not even bothering to show up to campaign in Wisconsin. Like somebody. All right, that's all for today. Drop me a comment and stay tuned.